So Black Ops 6 versus MW 2019. One of the things that I did want to talk about is it says that somebody ended up posting on this specific post, it said Black Ops movement versus the other movement. And we'll go ahead and take a look at these. I went through and did a bunch of different side-by-side testing so we can take a look at and talk about the various things, because there's a lot of different subtle things that really differentiate the games that one ends up making the game feel clunky versus not clunky. First thing we'll take a look at is the crosshair bounce, and that's specifically the center dot, how far it moves from the center. So I have my own X built in there so we can see how far it moves. In MW 2019, the dot does not move. Obviously your crosshairs spread out, so the individual lines right here, here, and here will move, but the actual dot stays fixed. In MW2, they introduced this mechanic where as you move, your crosshairs will move to adjust and reflect what your gun is doing. This was a bad mechanic that IW introduced and a lot of people just didn't really like. So much so that a lot of people put the default dot to fixed, even though that didn't align with the character model and led to some inaccuracies. They've since basically removed that. So now everyone's forced to have the crosshairs that move. So we can go ahead and take a look at here. So if we're looking at the jump over on the MW 2019, the dot will stay in the center. And then this one, the dot will go bounce up and below that white line. So you can kind of see how that looks as we go ahead and look through the bounce. You can kind of see what it's doing there. And I think this leads to a lot of problems because it leads to a lot of more movement on the screen. And it kind of forgets the point that we were playing a first-person shooter. Cold War didn't really have this issue. Vanguard really didn't have this issue. Like I said, MW2 is when this got introduced into the engine, and it doesn't seem like any of the other developers have been able to take it out. So this is one of the first problems. They could revert and solve a lot of the problems. Even if you're going to keep the crosshairs pretty wide, how wide the hipfire spread is, keep that wide, not a big deal, but make it so that we're not having the movement of that if it's possible. And I know that's an engine level change that they have to go ahead and make happen. Next is mantle to fire, and these are pretty about the same. I didn't really notice much of a difference. Maybe MW 2019 is just a little bit slower. Black Ops 6 feels a little bit more fluid when it comes to this type of movement. The gun, the way it moves, everything's in there. I also took a look at single mantling speeds. So this is when you're mantling over something, essentially vaulting, not mantling up, but mantling over. And we can kind of see what this is doing here. They basically looked identical there. If we go back, like just look as we go through, right across, boom. So these ones are pretty identical. There's a lot of other stuff going on as we'll talk about when we get to some of the visual shaking that's happening on the screen. But in general, the speeds are relatively the same when it comes to mantling. I know some people say mantling slow, but one of the big differences with mantling in MW 2019, you simply just couldn't mantle something. Like it was too high for you. And then in MW2, they introduced a mechanic where you can grab, latch on, pull up, go over. They've essentially, it's hard to compare the mechanic because we didn't have the mechanic before. You just were not able to mantle things. Head to head, I feel like it's better to be able to mantle more things, but that motion needs to just be faster. Pop up like a super soldier. Bunny hop. This is one that was more of a skill gap. We're going to see the MW 2019 one up atop. That one you should be able to get 1 to 2 bounces depending on your frame timing. They removed it. There's no opportunity to do it with a perk. There's no opportunity to do it with the skill. If you're off a higher elevation, it's not going to give you the momentum you need. So unfortunately, you just get a dead. As soon as you jump, your momentum's dead. I wanted to take a look at reload speed. MP5 is very similar to the C9. They're not identical, but they're kind of going for the same look. And the reloads end up being basically the same. It looks like they're really close to each other. I checked them head to head. I think MW 2019 was just a little bit faster, and you could equip sleight of hand, which would make it a little bit faster as a weapon perk. That's not the main go-to for a lot of people. And then BO6, all you can really do is put on a smaller mag or the fast mags, and it'll solve for having a faster there. So I also want to take a look at the reticle shift while strafing. Because how far it goes off center. Obviously, we looked at the hip fire before. Now this is the reticle strafe. We can go ahead and see this. And what we're seeing here is a little bit more of a bounciness. You can see that not only right here where we can see this part of the gun is moving that I just traced out more than this top portion. This optic portion has way more bob and weave. Even if the crosshairs aren't like moving all over the place, the actual movement is a little bit more subtle, but it does have that bounciness of the strafe. Obviously, it's a little bit more realistic, but this is one of those things where you can see how little the VLK bobs compared to the Jason 2X or whatever it is. It just bounces all over the place. Here is also where you get the shift. Like we saw with the hipfire jump, MW 2019 does move. When you jump, it will jump. And MW 2019 had a jump fatigue mechanic so that if your first jump would actually give you the most height, and every subsequent jump would be slightly shorter until you took a quick break, and then it would allow you to get the max height jump. So we'll be able to show that off when we're showing these clips back to back. But one thing that was nice about the MW 2019 is it's straight up and down vertical, the movement, versus what we're seeing with the BO6. When you do the jump, it ends up kicking your crosshair off to the side. So if you look at that closely, you'll be able to know what I'm talking about. You can see kind of, it moves slightly at an angle when it's 2019, but nowhere near what we're seeing with the bounciness in the BO6, where that reticle is bouncing all over the place and kind of in a dramatic fashion where it doesn't really look particularly well. Recoil, visual shake doesn't actually look as bad as I felt like it would be when you compare them head to head. So when we look at these, we can go ahead and just fire without really recoil control. You can see that there is some visual shake. These are the same FOB, essentially the same created class, essentially the meta build for the gun. XM4 for both of them. You can see when I'm controlling the recoil, they basically have the same fire rate. They line up. So not as dramatic as I would expect, but I think the big difference here is if we look at how much this part of the gun is moving. So this is right before it's fired. We'll go ahead and trace it just a little bit so you can kind of see the comparison there. There, that one's traced. Let's go ahead and go here just so you can kind of see how far it moves over. And that visual shake is where a lot of the problem happens. And this is actually where I think most of the visual shake is coming from. Obviously, further zoom optics and all that, they got to dial that in because there's a lot going on. But you'll see that the actual gun model is kind of what's shaking a lot more than what we saw in MW 2019. So we go ahead and press play. You can see right here, it's not moving particularly a lot. But then right there, look at how big the gap is from where I drew it. And the gun moves quite a bit. So I think that's where they can dial in whatever those values are. Just double check whatever those values were in 2019 and then scale them back so we can go ahead and kind of work on that particular aspect. The other part is if we look at the reticle, we can also see that it moves a little bit. So focus particularly on the center of where those lines intersect. And you'll see that the VLK one moves slightly in 2019, very little. When it comes to Black Ops 6, we're seeing a little bit more above and below where we can actually see the black lines move a little bit off center. So here we go. So you can see how it's bouncing to the side and up. Subtle, not a crazy amount. Obviously, this is a low recoil gun. But if we looked at more higher recoil guns, we see more dramatic. I just felt that I want to use the M4 and XM4 since they're like identical fire rate and stuff like that. Drop shot. One thing with the drop shot in MW 2019 is when you drop down, you just drop down kind of smoothly and the gun doesn't move too much. It's kind of like the foreground and the background, they work differently, right? One stays fixed and the other one moves a lot, because you're actually moving. In BO6, they both move and they both have like their independent movement so that it kind of adjusts and gives you that wonky feel where it feels like a lot more shaking is going on. So that's what we'll see right here when we look at these drop shots. And it has a little bit of a bounce when you hit the bottom on BO6. So right here, there it is, boom. And you'll go ahead and see them back to back. A little bit of a bounce on MW 2019. But how much the gun is moving, that wonky angle movement, it's so much cleaner. Even though graphically, I feel like the graphics are better in BO6, maybe not necessarily this map, the actual shaking is what ruins the clarity of the movement. So like right here, the gun is fairly clear as soon as we're standing still. but as soon as we drop shot, it introduces a little bit of wobble to the gun and introduces a little bit of blurriness. So you can go ahead and see that there. It's not insane. Obviously at 1440p, it's going to look clear, but at 1080p on a console or whatever, you're going to introduce a little bit more issues. Okay, I checked weapon swap speed. It didn't look particularly a big difference there. I didn't try it with amped. Obviously we had that perk. It was kind of a default perk that you kind of had to use. And then in Warzone 2, they made it super clunky. Then in Warzone 3 or MW3's integration, they made it so we got the perk by default. So it sped up the game quite a bit. I think they need to do something similar to that and improve the reload time so that we can actually have faster reloads across the board. You can see how much the movement's happening. I didn't even put the dots on there because I felt like it wasn't even necessary for how big a difference it was. So this is the HDR on the top, and this is the L762 gun that we currently have in Black Ops 6. And you can see it's way dramatic what's going on there. The idle sway, we can also see kind of how much it drifts. The screen when you ADS. MW 2019 wasn't perfect. It wouldn't go to direct to center. I think at MW3, it ended up having a better aim down sight physics for the snipers particularly. When you aim down sight, it would go to the same spot wherever that white dot was on the screen. For whatever reason, MW 2019, they had a version of it the same way we do now. Their version was a little bit more subtle. So I would hope that eventually we'd get back to the version that we had in MW3 and then combine that with MW 2019's so we get like the best of both worlds, because I think there were some elements where it was better and some worse. Strafe speed. Both of these are the stock version. We're going to go ahead and ADS, and then they start strafing 15 meters at the same distance, same time, same everything. I synced it up, and you can see that BO6 is faster. Like it hits the wall, and look how much it takes to hit the wall over there. Boom. And then we have also the straightforward walking, 15 meters. This one's 23, and it goes all the way down to 8. So we'll go ahead and hit 0 here and 8 up the top. And you can see it's a little bit faster. So base movement speed is a little bit faster. So any residual clunkiness primarily has to do with the gun animations that are causing a lot of these issues to make it feel sluggish and less snappy. They also, in MW2, they did introduce the system that removed prone blockage. We have the serpentine prone, or whatever the heck it's called. That allows you to turn 360 degrees while on the ground. In MW 2019, we were prone blocked. So that's night and day difference. Slide to fire. We can see that there is a little bit of delay on this one. And then when we come through, this one's still a little bit faster, and I'm not even using any attachments. Ergonomic and all that could be sped up insanely fast. Snaking, it was pretty broken in MW 2019. They've had snaking in like, I don't know, 12 or 13 different CODs. And normally the devs go out of their way to try to tune it. What we can see right here is it's going to look really glitchy when Attach does it in MW 2019. And they've gone out of their way to smooth this out, specifically each iteration, and they've solved a way to do it. And you'll see that Black Ops 6 looks way smoother. Black Ops 6 is probably the better game design one because of how glitchy it is. Look at how you can see it kind of like stutter, and then on the bottom one it looks very smooth. So they got the timing down a little bit better, so it matches in game a little bit more consistently. Obviously it's more of an exploit, just like slide canceling was to reset your tactical sprint, but they never corrected it, so people got used to it, and that's what they wanted from the gameplay. That's a whole other story. Jump ADS. So one of the things I want to talk about too is, obviously it's kind of hard. I'd have to go frame by frame and compare it, but basically what you're looking for is the outline of the gun for both of these. And what ends up happening is, because of the crosshairs and ADS and the gun movement, it feels like a lot more is happening in Black Ops 6. And then in MW 2019, it ends up looking more snappy because it doesn't have these other animations going on, even though the speeds aren't dramatically different. Like if you look at them side by side, Black Ops 6 doesn't go crazy, but it has a weightiness to it, which I get from a realistic perspective, but overall I'm not a fan of because it makes it feel like the game is clunkier. I ended up playing 2019 for about 45 minutes, getting some B-roll, messing around, testing some stuff. And overall, I felt like the game felt slower and less smooth that we've been accustomed to over some of the iterations, because it's like the original version of MW 2019 before Warzone went in and changed some stuff. I still think MW3 had some better stuff, and it's kind of sucks because it's like, I just want the best from all of them, right? Give me the best from all of them. And the reality is we end up with like, okay, cool, we got one new thing that's really good, and then we got rid of all the other stuff that we liked, and now it feels like crap. And Warzone 2 really sent the franchise back. I don't think they really intended to ever have this many integrations. I think originally when Warzone first dropped, to my knowledge, it was supposed to be a standalone, that's it, like Blackout. But it was so popular, obviously COVID played a role in that, that the player counts drove so high, obviously free to play, maybe multiplayer will be free to play at some point, same with zombies. But regardless, then they added in Cold War and then Vanguard. And they're like, ooh, we didn't really build this thing. The foundation was very weak. And we didn't really build it to be stacking up on top. And that's why we were able to have some consistency for those years, even though each integration was busted. And then when we jumped into Warzone 2, I think the people at COD really thought that this was the future of Call of Duty. And they were just so wrong. They couldn't have been more wrong about the franchise and the direction of the franchise and what the players wanted. That had some of the worst player retention in the history of the franchise, to my knowledge. The drop-off needs to be studied how bad it was. So essentially they spent a year trying to fix what they did, but obviously when you change the engine a certain way, I'm sure it's more technical. They ended up getting to something that was decent in MW3. But the vision was always to have Omni movement included in it, and it just didn't pan out well. There's too many bugs. I think Omni movement as a whole is good. I think there's a lot of good things with Black Ops 6 being carried over, less backpacks, whatever. They simplified the game to make it really good, but they still haven't figured out, let's remove the visual shake of weapons. Let's move the realism. Let's remove the slow reload times. Let's remove the weapon swap that we already know the players have liked from these certain iterations, and make the perfect game. Going forward though, I think we're gonna get to a point where everything's gonna be on the Omni movement side. So we'll see where it goes from there. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, learned something new. Appreciate all the support. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.